Urban Odyssey, a bicentennial project of the DC Community Humanities Council.
Washington, D.C.'s ethnic past and the formation of its ethnic communities have been little studied and are little known. The omission of the Italians in the city's history is especially ironic, since the monuments and buildings that distinguish the nation's capital were often crafted by Italian immigrant artisans and built by the sweat of Italian workers. Nicholas DeCarlo was the first priest of Holy Rosary Church and the first in Washington, D.C. to address the pressing spiritual, emotional, and physical needs of the growing Italian community. Although he came to the city in 1912 as a sojourner, DeCarlo stayed for the next 50 years to build an institutional base for the Italian presence in the city. His stewardship of the church and its many social initiatives paved the way for wider acceptance of the Italian cultural heritage in Washington. DeCarlo's legacy lives on through Holy Rosary, which still stands at 39th Street Northwest, testimony to the once bustling Italian community which surrounded it. The DC Community Humanities Council Urban Odyssey series presents Father Nicholas DeCarlo, a voice from Washington's Italian community. Back in 1912, there were approximately 3,000 Italians in Washington, D.C., and no Catholic church or even an Italian priest to hear confessions. I was then a student at Catholic University in the Graduate School of Biology, studying to become a teacher. When Monsignor Mackin, assistant to the Bishop of Baltimore, called me in and asked me to fill this void. Now, before I could even muster enough courage to protest this sudden, unwanted change in my lifestyle, a flash came to my mind. I remembered that back in Naples, as a seminarian, I had been dangerously ill, and I had promised the Holy Mother that should I live, I would build her a church. I just felt that that time had come, that I should now keep my promise. I was told it would be difficult, that there were no little Italies in Washington, D.C. as in Philadelphia or Boston or New York. And I felt the need that a church had to be created to provide both spiritual guidance and economic assistance for this growing Italian community. And so I rented the parlor of the Cheney home on North Capitol Street near H. And with these hands, I built an altar rail, went around and borrowed some benches and chairs. And on a blustery night in December, I celebrated the first Mass at the chapel of the Holy Rosary. Some 40 families attended, Deo gratias. 5 years later, we laid the cornerstone for Holy Rosary Church. The basement was finished by Christmas 1919, and that's where we celebrated Mass for the next 5 years, in the basement. Little did I know that someday I would be buried there. Nickel by nickel, stone by stone, a window here when there was money, or a beam there when there was money, slowed only by World War I and the limitations of our people, not to mention the insistence from everybody that this shrine to the Holy Mother be built to absolute perfection. This church was dedicated bare of even a cross in 1925. The hall next door was finished in 1938, and the bells rang gloriously when the bell tower was finally finished in 1947. Now let me tell you this. Local newspapers proclaimed Holy Rosary a work of art. They said that few churches in Washington embodied the atmosphere of Holy Rosary, an atmosphere of the Renaissance. We were very proud of such praise and honor, but we never forgot that we were a struggling and proud people. Now let me tell you about these men, women, and children who built this church. They lived in small clusters all about Washington, near Union Station and the Capitol, H Street Northeast, some by the waterfront. Swamp Poodle was an old neighborhood of wooden shacks by K&L Street in North Capitol, where the Irish lived when first came. As the Irish were moving out, the Italians were moving in, mostly railroad workers. It was a hard and dirty work that they did, and some even died doing it. Italians, like other immigrants, liked to live near where they worked. And most Italians that came over the turn of the century came to work on federal buildings, Union Station, the Capitol, the Library of Congress. Some came directly from Italy, while others came from other American cities. You know, Washington was never a job center, was never an industrial city. So many people came to work here, and some came to get away from de facto slavery of some mining company towns so that they could work with dignity and self-respect. Others came to open up small businesses, grocery stores, barber shops, restaurants, to serve an ever-increasing number in the Italian community. It is ironic that the history books omit almost entirely the existence of an Italian community in Washington. I say ironic because the very essence that distinguishes Washington from other American cities, the monuments, museums, architectural landmarks, were the creations of the genius of Italian minds, and likewise were built with sweat and labor of Italian workers. You will pardon me if I seem to scold. My parishioners often criticize me for this. I was a strong defender of my people, but never hesitated to call them to task when they did wrong. I was a simple Augustinian priest, trained as a scholar in the old ways which was stern and severe. Later they told younger seminarians new techniques to relate to people. But I had to do with what I had. And what I had was a theological job. I had to do it, and I did it. And now, this is our little neighborhood. Not much to look at. A few boarded up houses. The old pension building, beautiful as ever. And did you know, modeled after the Palazzo Farnese in Rome. It is now the National Building Museum. Most buildings are gone now. Only Holy Rosary remains. Italians thrived on these streets, but not only Italians, for we lived among the Jews and the Irish and the Germans. A couple blocks over toward Chinatown by 4th and Mass, DeCarlo had his deli. Came over from Italy in 1904 with nothing but the recollection of his mother's cannoli recipe. Before he knew it, he was selling 2,000 cannolis a week. Going to Vaccaro's for cannolis or pastries after Sunday Mass had become a ritual with Italian families. And right at the border with Chinatown and 9th and H was the Torino restaurant, where in 1923 the first Neapolitan pizza was introduced to Washington, and where I, for so many Mondays I cannot begin to count, indulged in some beautiful meals that Don Pepe Di Rienzo so gracefully prepared for our Monday night's dinner together. He was there until 1960, And that too is gone. But in place of it, we have the Washington Convention Center. The old pension building had a park where they held free concerts on Sundays, the Army, Navy, Marine Band. And Italians would go there week after week with the big picnic baskets and their children and their friends. And they would gather and form groups, the Italian from the north and the Italians from the south, the Neapolitans, the Calabrians, the Sicilians, and the old and the young. And now you must see this church that we built. This, of course, is 3rd Street. You can't miss it by the beautiful mosaics. Over the center door, the Virgin Mary and the Christ Child. And over to the side, the emblem of Italy. And on the other side, the shield of the United States. And yes, over the arch of the main entrance, the seal of St. Peter's Basilica and the Vatican. You see, we did this the old Italian way, with love and reverence for the old country and the new. And now, let's go inside. Here we have more beautiful mosaics on the floor, on the walls, marble mosaics, all designed by Italian artists and all built by our own church members. They worked like old monks, often till after midnight, while the others were standing and watching, always criticizing, always demanding near perfection, as we all did. They tried to tear this place down in 1963 to build the freeway. Father Spigolone then, during one of his weekly radio messages over Pino Cicala's program, sounded the alarm. Committees were formed. Church members got together under the leadership of Mrs. Anna Carrozza and Pina Mantella and Lucia Lentini and Susan Lonzupone. A campaign started. The fight began. And it culminated, as stated by these excerpts from a letter that Father Spigolone sent to Pino Cicala, which read in part, Caro Pino, ce l'abbiamo fatta. Dear Pino, we've done it. La Chiesa del Santo Rosario è salva. The Church of the Holy Rosary has been saved. We fought and survived, yes, though we lost a little of our backyard to the freeway. And yes, there was music. So much beautiful music. Did you know that in 1926, when the Queen Mother in Italy died, the Metropolitan Opera came here to Holy Rosary? The walls shook, literally shook, to the music of Verdi's Requiem. That must be one of my fondest memories. But there are others. Let's walk into the study now. Imagine this is the 20s or 30s. It is early morning. God willing, we'll be able to have 5 minutes before the bell rings or the doorbell. It's always one thing or the other. This morning, before the sun rose, the phone rang. It was this woman from the police station. Her landlady had had her hauled in for non-payment of rent, so I rushed down to post bail for her. And no sooner than I got back home, our whole family comes knocking at the door, looking for a place to stay and a few dollars to get started. It seems that a brother that had lived before here and then gone back to Calabria had told them, when you go to America and you go to Washington, if you need anything, go see Father DeCarlo. Go see Father DeCarlo. This church was, after all, their bridge into the New World. This is where people who couldn't speak English would come for sacraments, advice, confessions. This is what I was here for. But Father DeCarlo was also known at the police station. If a kid got in trouble, I'd run down and try to intercede. I would say, release him to me. He won't come back here, I guarantee to that. I'd take him back to the church, we'd have a little talk, I would call his mama, and that'd be the end of it. There were so many things to do here. Believe me when I tell you, life never got boring. With documents to be translated, English lessons, helping people with their naturalization papers, teaching these newcomers how to become good Americans, good citizens. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes even advising in the making up of a marriage, or discouraging one when the parents were not quite in agreement. But Father DeCarlo was not the only name known in Italy, of course. At least one comes immediately to mind. If in the Washington area someone was in need of a midwife, they would call on Mrs. Messina, La Mammina. A saint of a woman she was, delivered practically every Italian baby that was born here for a long time, many, many years, never charged a nickel. And her daughters, when the flu epidemic started after World War I, it was the Messina women who went from house to nurse the sick, and not just Italians either. For we lived and worked among the Jews and the Irish and the Germans, and as time went by, the blacks. Our shops mingled with Irish saloons, Jewish dry goods stores, Chinese laundries, and they all shared with us the joy of our colorful processions, led down Pennsylvania Avenue by Maestro Romeo and the Holy Rosary Marching Band. And our festivals and bazaars attracted people from all over the region. The Italians that lived here were by and large hardworking people. Some worked as many as 16 hours a day while their women stayed home looking after the children. Take DeSandro, for instance, the fruit vendor. He pushed his cart some days from very early in the morning till late at night, wherever there were Italians. And Chef Bonuccello, he worked at the Willard Hotel and the Occidental Restaurant, but never missed one afternoon to go back home and play with his children. And there was fun too. Lots of family gatherings and Sunday picnics. And there were dances. I didn't approve of dances, but little did that matter. What can I tell you? Italians must be a very fun-loving people. Some other people did very good, however. Take Anthony Izzo. From an apprentice bricklayer, he became one of the largest bricklaying companies in the area. His company helped build the Washington Hospital Center and the Watergate and the Labor Department. He also helped found the Masonry Institute and was later a member of the Board of Trade. And Anthony Carrozza, he saw his dream fulfilled when he built the first covered shopping center in this area, Iverson Mall in Prince George's County. Some other were not so charitable, but I never hesitated to remind them, radix omni malorum cupiditas, greed is the root of all evil. And the women, they were the brightest of the bright stones of this mosaic of Italian people. They were my harshest judges and my dearest friends and supporters. Though like their men, they were essentially literate, they saw to it that their kids would take advantage of all the education opportunities that this country offered. And so they saw to it that they would go to higher education. And today, their last names encounter many of the registers of professionals, doctors, engineers, lawyers, business people, politicians. The 40s were odd years for Holy Rosary. We were stunned at Mussolini's decision to plunge our beloved homeland into war against our new country. However, we supported the Allied effort, and many Italian Americans served in the war. 612 from our community, to be exact. Some died. Others were wounded. Many came back decorated for valor. In the war years, German and Italian nationals were looked upon with great suspicion. Some were even put to jail. FBI men would come into our homes if we owned a camera or a radio. This was understandable in some ways, but it sure was hard to swallow. The end of the war marked the end of the old Holy Rosary neighborhood as we'd come to know. Urban renewal had come in and tore down whatever buildings had remained to build new government offices and the I-95 freeway. Others had moved out when the blacks had started to move in from the south in great numbers. I did not approve of this. It's very sad to say, but this was the reality. Other Italians had moved into better neighborhoods as their wealth increased and they needed larger homes or wanted better schools and large yards for their kids. And so they moved in other areas of Washington, Petworth, Chilham, Brooklyn. Others moved in suburban Maryland and Virginia, like Silver Spring and Fairfax, Bethesda, Prince George's County, Montgomery County. Father Spigolone, who came in 1960 to replace me when I retired, thought that we didn't need an Italian church or even an Italian-speaking priest, that the melting pot would have observed the Italians. But was he ever surprised? He found a core of 2,000 to 3,000 Italian families attending church, and that many families coming in each year wanting to find their roots, wanting to learn the language. In 1981, the cultural center next door was built. Isn't it grand to see the statues of our famous forebearers adorn this great building? Michelangelo, Dante, Verdi, Marconi. And now, 1991, they've already started building the new educational center where there will be real classrooms. But now, enough of the past. I would say it is important to understand the past so we can plan properly for the future. And I will tell you, as I've told my parishioners many times, quel che conta è domani. What counts is tomorrow. And I grow impatient when I see that so much needs to be done. Like brilliant mosaics, people must unite. Now you've heard some of my stories. Speak your heart. But always remember, quel che conta è domani.
you.